It is February 4th, 2024. This is Nayib Bukele. He has just won re-election with 85% of the vote. His Twitter bio reads, "Philosopher King," though it once read, "the world's coolest dictator." Standing before thousands of cheering supporters, he raises his fist in victory. But this moment represents something unprecedented in modern politics. A leader who polls at 90% approval, while international observers warn that democracy itself is dying under his rule. How does a man become simultaneously the most beloved and most feared leader in the Western Hemisphere? Because tonight, as fireworks explode over San Salvador, Nayib Bukele has achieved what political scientists thought impossible. He has built a dictatorship that his people absolutely adore. This is not the story you think it is. This is not about a tyrant crushing his people into submission. This is about a population so desperate for safety, so hungry for order, that they willingly traded their freedoms for the promise of peace. And the terrifying part is not that it happened. The terrifying part is that it worked. 5 years ago, El Salvador was dying. Gang members controlled entire neighborhoods. Families paid extortion fees just to keep their businesses open. Children walked to school past bodies dumped in the streets. The murder rate soared to 73 per 100,000 people, making El Salvador one of the most dangerous countries on earth outside of active war zones. Into this chaos stepped a 37-year-old former mayor with perfectly styled hair and a social media obsession. Nayib Bukele promised something no politician had dared promise before. He would not negotiate with gangs. He would not accept corruption as inevitable. He would rebuild El Salvador from the ground up, no matter the cost. What happened next defies every rule of democratic governance. Bukele did not just win power. He seized it, and he systematically dismantled every institution that could oppose him. He turned El Salvador into his personal laboratory for authoritarian control. The legislature, the courts, the press, the military, one by one, they all bent to his will. But here is the part that keeps political scientists awake at night. The people love him for it. In March 2022, after gang members killed 62 people in a single weekend, Bukele declared a state of emergency. Constitutional rights vanished overnight, and due process disappeared. The right to legal defense evaporated. Police could arrest anyone, anywhere, for any reason. And they did. 87,000 people have been detained under Bukele's crackdown. That is 1% of the entire population locked away. Fathers disappeared from their homes. Sons vanished from street corners. Mothers were arrested for having the wrong tattoo or living in the wrong neighborhood. The government admits that 90% of those imprisoned have never been convicted of any crime. 8,000 innocent people have been released after months or years behind bars simply because there was never any evidence against them. International human rights organizations documented torture in the prisons, beatings until unconscious, denial of food and medical care, men, women, and children crammed into cells designed for half their number. The Organization of American States called the elections unfair. The World Press Freedom Index watched El Salvador plummet 61 places in 5 years. Democracy watchdogs reclassified the country as a hybrid regime, no longer a full democracy. And yet Bukele's approval rating never dropped below 75%. It often soars above 90%, making him one of the most popular leaders on the planet. Why? Because the bodies stopped appearing in the streets. El Salvador's murder rate crashed from 73 per 100,000 to just 1.9 per 100,000 in 2024, one of the lowest in the entire Americas. Families could walk outside after dark for the first time in decades. Children played in parks that were once controlled by armed gangs. Businesses reopened without paying extortion fees. Tourism returned to beaches that had been abandoned to violence. Bukele did not just reduce crime. He eliminated it so completely that El Salvador transformed from one of the world's most dangerous countries to one of its safest. And for millions of Salvadorans who had lived in terror for years, this miracle was worth any price. But was the miracle real, or was it built on a lie? In 2020, investigative journalists at El Faro uncovered a stunning secret. Top officials in Bukele's government had allegedly been negotiating with gang leaders since the beginning of his presidency. not to destroy the gangs, but to control them. Prison records showed gang leaders receiving special privileges, access to mobile phones, protection from extradition to the United States, promises of lighter sentences. In exchange, the gangs agreed to hide bodies to reduce recorded murders and support Bukele's party in elections. 7 of those journalists now have arrest warrants against them. The newspaper operates primarily from Costa Rica to avoid retaliation. The criminal investigation into these alleged negotiations was shut down when Bukele's allies replaced the Attorney General in 2021. If the allegations are true, then Bukele's war on gangs was not a war at all. It was a business arrangement that fell apart, leading to the bloodbath that triggered the state of emergency. The mass arrests that followed were not the solution to gang violence. They were the cover-up for years of secret deals that had finally collapsed. But even if the negotiations happened, even if the initial crime reduction was orchestrated rather than earned, something undeniable occurred during the crackdown. The gangs were broken, their networks shattered, their reign of terror ended. Whether through secret deals or mass imprisonment, Bukele delivered on his central promise. He made El Salvador safe, and safety, it turns out, is worth almost anything to people who have lived without it for so long. This is the paradox of Nayib Bukele, a leader who may have built his early success on lies, who certainly destroyed democratic institutions, who imprisoned tens of thousands of innocent people, and who rules through fear and intimidation. Yet also a leader who gave his people something they had not experienced in generations: the simple right to live without terror. But Bukele was not content with just ending gang violence. He had bigger plans for El Salvador. In September 2021, El Salvador became the first country in history to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Bukele announced this decision not through careful economic analysis or legislative debate, but with a single tweet with laser eyes and rocket ship emojis. The world watched in fascination and horror as a nation of 6 million people became the testing ground for the most radical monetary experiment of the digital age. Bukele promised that Bitcoin would transform El Salvador's economy. Foreign investment would pour in, banking would become accessible to the unbanked masses, and the country would leap from poverty into prosperity on the back of a cryptocurrency revolution. He spent $150 million of public money, roughly 4% of the nation's reserves, buying Bitcoin as the price soared toward its peak. Then came the crash. By June 2022, Bitcoin had lost 70% of its value. The 2,300 coins El Salvador purchased lost half their worth almost overnight. International credit agencies downgraded the country's rating. The International Monetary Fund warned of unnecessary risks to an already fragile economy. Economic growth slowed. Public spending on water infrastructure and essential services decreased, while Bukele continued announcing on Twitter that he was buying the dip. But Bukele had learned something crucial about modern governance. Perception matters more than reality. While economists worried about fiscal responsibility, he marketed Bitcoin adoption as proof that El Salvador was innovative, forward-thinking, and technologically advanced. He built a gleaming Bitcoin conference center. He announced plans for a Bitcoin city powered by volcanic energy. He transformed economic recklessness into a brand of digital leadership. The strategy worked. Tech entrepreneurs flocked to El Salvador. Cryptocurrency conferences brought international attention. Young Salvadorans posted videos on social media celebrating their president's bold vision. Even as the economy struggled, even as basic food costs rose by $50 over 4 years, consuming 3/4 of the minimum wage, Bukele's image as a visionary leader remained intact. This is the genius of Bukele's authoritarianism. It does not rely on fear alone. It feeds on hope, on the promise that El Salvador is becoming something special, something unique in the world. Every policy failure becomes evidence of external enemies trying to stop the country's progress. Every criticism from international organizations becomes proof that the global establishment fears what Bukele is building. When the 2024 election approached, Bukele faced a constitutional problem. El Salvador's constitution explicitly prohibited consecutive presidential terms. The founders, haunted by decades of military dictatorships, had written this restriction to prevent exactly what Bukele was attempting. But constitutions, he discovered, are just words on paper when you control the people who interpret them. In 2021, after his party won a supermajority in legislative elections, Bukele's allies voted to replace the Attorney General and all 5 justices of the Supreme Court's Constitutional Chamber. The new court promptly reinterpreted the Constitution's ban on consecutive re-election. Bukele could run again. Democracy had been legally dismantled by democratic means. International observers called the election unfair. They noted the atypical campaign conducted under a permanent state of emergency. They documented deficiencies that affected fairness and transparency. They warned that holding elections while constitutional rights remained suspended creates conditions where normal democratic processes cannot function. None of it mattered. Bukele's vote share rose from 53% to 85%. His governing coalition captured 90% of legislative seats, leaving only 3 opposition legislators. They won at least 39 of 44 mayoral offices. The opposition was not just defeated, it was obliterated. The day after his victory, Bukele's government announced plans for further constitutional changes. Presidential terms would extend from 5 to 6 years. Runoff elections would be eliminated. Most significantly, the prohibition on indefinite re-election would be removed entirely. Bukele was not just winning elections, he was ensuring there would never be meaningful elections again. This is how democracy dies in the 21st century, not through military coups or violent revolutions, but through legal procedures manipulated by popular leaders who convince their people that freedom is less important than results. Bukele has created a new model of authoritarianism, one that maintains the appearance of democratic legitimacy while gutting its substance. And the people celebrate every step of the process. They see their president standing up to international pressure. They watch him dismiss foreign criticism as interference from powers that want to keep El Salvador weak and dependent. They believe they are witnessing the birth of a strong, independent nation rather than the death of their democracy. Because for millions of Salvadorans, democracy never delivered what Bukele has delivered. Democratic governments presided over decades of violence, corruption, and poverty. Democratic institutions failed to protect them from gangs or provide basic services. Democratic leaders made promises they never kept while enriching themselves and their allies. Bukele kept his promises. He ended the violence. He brought order. He made El Salvador a country his people could be proud of again. And if the price was democracy itself, most Salvadorans seem willing to pay it. This is the terrifying lesson of El Salvador under Nayib Bukele. Authoritarianism succeeds not when it crushes the people's will, but when it becomes their will. When citizens choose strongmen over institutions, order over freedom, results over rights. When they trade the messy uncertainty of democracy for the clean efficiency of one-man rule. But every authoritarian system eventually faces the same question. What happens when the strongman is gone? Bukele is 63 years old. He has eliminated term limits and created a system designed to keep him in power indefinitely. But time comes for every leader, even the most popular ones. And when that moment arrives, El Salvador will face a test that no amount of polling data can predict. What happens to a country built around one man when that man is no longer there? What happens to institutions that exist only to serve his will? What happens to a people who have forgotten how to govern themselves? The supporters celebrating in San Salvador's streets may not realize it yet, but they are not just cheering for their president. They are cheering for an experiment that could reshape how we think about power, democracy, and the social contract between rulers and the ruled. Other leaders around the world are watching. Other populations living in fear and frustration are taking notes. Nayib Bukele has proven that in the right circumstances, people will choose safety over freedom, order over rights, one strong leader over messy democratic institutions. He has shown that authoritarianism can be popular, that democracy can be dismantled legally, and that the international community will ultimately accept whatever system delivers results. Whether that makes him a visionary or a cautionary tale depends on what comes next. Because the true test of any political system is not how it handles success, but how it survives transition. And in El Salvador, that test is yet to come. This is Nayib Bukele, the philosopher king, the world's most popular authoritarian, the man who rebuilt El Salvador by breaking every rule of democratic governance. the man who proved that sometimes the people themselves choose to give up their freedom.